Hello folks, welcome to my YouTube channel Watercolor Impressions. Since it's snowing lately in Toronto, I thought it would be nice to do a winter painting and I want to share the process with you. Before we get on to it, hit the subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And let's get started, guys. Last week we learned how to do a downtown winter painting. This week I want to do a street view instead. This reference was taken outside my building. I've done a lot of winter paintings before. Most overcast winter painting seems to go dull because there is a lot of gray in our reference, as well as if you go outside and see an overcast winter scene, it looks dull with no colors in it. So in overcast winter paintings, in order to things to pop up, we have to introduce a lot of colors in it. For the sky, I kept it really simple. I used dirt in my palette. What I mean by that is whatever left over in my palette, and I used a little bit of white in it, and I kept it flat as possible. For the background, I tried to keep things really simple. As you can see, since my paper is really wet and I'm introducing a lot of colors here and there, I also want to create this moody background which goes in distance, and it also helps us to create some depth in our painting. So once I'm happy with it, and I'm jumping on to the foreground building. For the foreground building, outside my building, there's a lot of Victorian houses there. So a lot of Victorian houses have this little bit of orange brownish colors in them. So for that, I'm using cadmium orange and a little bit of burnt sienna and throwing a little bit of red here and there to have some color variations. Whenever you do snow scene, make sure to leave some white gaps here and there so that it also gives an impression of snow as well. Even though in reality there is a little bit of value in the snow, but in order to things to pop up and to create contrast, this will help us to do it. Now I'm jumping on to the attic and the roof of the building now. So there's a little bit of green in there, even though in reality in the reference it's different, but I want to create a unity, so I used that green for the roof, and I also continued that to all the houses in the foreground to the background. And you could see in watercolors, the beautiful thing about it is it paints by itself. So I'm really introducing a darker value, and I'm introducing a mid value at the same time, so it kind of like creates this melting effect in our painting, and it also visually pleasing for our viewers as well. There is a lot of trees in the foreground. For the trees, I'm using burnt amber and a little bit of NeutralTint in it, and sometimes I use burnt sienna and raw amber and raw sienna in it. Because whenever you use darker tones, make sure to use some colors. I don't want to introduce colors which are super dark and black. And in the reference, the trees have a lot of branches and a lot of stems, but I want to keep it really impressionistic as possible, and I also want it and keep it like visually pleasing to our viewers. So as a painter, you are sending a visual language and you are sending visual cues to the viewer, so I want to make sure to capture that instead of painting exactly what's in your painting. As you can see, for the snow on the ground, I'm using the dirt again from my palette, and I'm using a little bit of white in it, so it kind of gives that snowy effect in our road. And in the foreground, I'm introducing a little bit of colors in it so that it kind of acts as a lead-in for us. Plane separation is really important in any kind of painting because it helps us to arrange things from foreground to the midground and to the background. As you could see, as soon as I introduce a little bit of plane change using burnt amber and a little bit of NeutralTint in it, it shows the buildings are arranged from foreground to the background and to the midground. And once I'm happy with it, there's also a tree which also helps us to focus the midground building for us. So even though I'm making sure that I keep the value a little bit lighter compared to the foreground, because since things in the midground tends to have a lighter value. For the background building, I want to keep it really flat as possible because I don't want to read as much as our foreground and the midground. Because our focal point is the four houses and the trees in the foreground to the midground. And you can see it's a simple stroke with a little bit of color variations here and there. And I also left a little bit of white bits here and there to have snow impressions on our background. And once I'm happy with it, I'm going to be jumping on to the figure in the foreground. For the figures, I'm gonna use NeutralTint, and I want to make it as dark as possible. And you can also see in the reference, the value is a little darker as well. And there's only one figure in our painting, so I don't want to keep him lonely, so I gave him a partner who is walking behind him. There's a car in the foreground. Personally, I don't want to add it, but I added it eventually, but we won't tell anyone about that. And after that, I jumped onto the roof, and for the roof, I'm collecting dirt from my palette, and I'm just doing strokes here and there to create that snowy effect on the roof as well. So now I'm adding a little bit of details on the trees in the foreground, and you could see I'm using a small tiny brush, and I'm trying to create some impression of a little bit of thickness in our trees as well. Whenever I paint, if there is any trees in my painting, I try to do one of the tree as a hero tree. It gives them a lot of details and a lot of love in the painting. I thought of doing that for the foreground trees, but my vision changed as I painted this, and there's also a little bit of white space on the right hand side, and it also sits on the magical spot of our painting. So I added a little bit of details on the midground tree than the foreground tree. And you can see as soon as we add the midground tree, the whole painting came alive. I took a little bit of NeutralTint and French Ultramarine Blue to add some planes in our painting for the buildings, as well as I added a little bit of shadows in the midground, the foreground and the background. I'll keep building it till I'm happy with it. Then we can focus on the foreground elements. There's big white space which is on the right hand side, and there is like two cars which is in the foreground, so I want to use that as a foreground element which lead us into the painting. You could see, and I'm keeping it like really flat as possible. And there's also a orange cone which is there, and I also wanted to add that so that there is kind of a little bit of a slope in the foreground. It also create an impression of snow there as well. And now I want to create some thickness on the tree, so I'm using a little bit of dirt from my palette. There's a light pole in the midground. I always get scared doing light pole because you have to do it in a single stroke. Even though I approached a lot of complicated subjects before, but one thing that scares me till this day is doing a light pole. Because it needs a single straight stroke. Sometimes you can use a ruler too, but personally I don't like using it. I'm quite happy that I'm able to do that in a single stroke. So that puts me in a good mood. So now I'm doing a little bit of telephone wires, light wires here and there, which helps us to create directional lines in our painting, which also helps us to create a little bit of perspective in our painting as well. And whenever you saw snow, there's a little bit of violet in it, if you don't believe. So I'm kind of using that as and shadow. And now the fun part begins. We can use a little bit of white paint and create snow as much as we can. To add the snow effect, I personally use gouache because when it comes to winter painting or to create snow, gouache usually sits pretty good, and it also opaque in a sense. And you can also use Chinese white, and some Chinese white works pretty good. Old Mine or Winsor Newton and Daniel Smith, you could use whatever you want. And you could see and keep building the details based on the reference. I squint my eyes, I see where the pattern is, and I'll just add it until I'm happy with it. When you do these kind of details, as an artist, we tend to get overboard with it, so we have to stop whenever we think it's really good and visually pleasing. Because sometimes we tend to overwork the painting, and it ended up being good at the first place. And whenever you think that what else you can add in a painting, that means you're done with the painting. That's it, folks. We are officially done with the winter painting, street view winter painting, and let's take off the tape. And it always gets me excited because it shows how your painting gonna look like when it's framed, and it also gives that crisp look in our painting as well. Thanks again for watching this street view winter painting video tutorial with me. Let me know what you learned from this video, or what's your favorite color in this painting. If you have any other requests or subjects you want me to cover in watercolors, write me at watercolorimpressions@gmail.com or comment below. Before we go, hit the subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And good luck with your painting, folks.